So I've seen the questions that were sent by the registrants. I've tried to cover this. Don't worry, it will not be too long. But let's see how we can introduce it. First, let's start with how is electricity generated. First, what we need is a boiler. A boiler is something that turns water into steam. And for you to boil something, you need a source of heat. That source of heat could be burning of food, oil, diesel, or coal. Or in our case, if we're going to use nuclear power, we need nuclear power as a source of heat. Then once the water is turned into steam, it will turn a turbine, and that turbine will drive an electric generator, which consists of a magnet rotating inside a stationary coil of wire. That magnetic field moves across the coil, and that transforms mechanical energy into electricity. So this is the basic concept behind electricity and the basic concept behind all thermal power plants. For example, here in the coal power plant, your boiler here, you have a boiler here, but the source of heat is burning of coal. For geothermal, what we don't do burning, but we harness the heat from the earth to boil water and to generate steam and to turn the turbine and so on. For hydroelectric power, it's not a thermal power plant, therefore it does not need boiling. And what we take advantage of here is the conversion of potential energy into mechanical energy, which there is this turbine here. Now, for the power plant, we also have a boiler. We have steam generation here, and then we have a turbine and a generator which converts mechanical energy into electricity. So more on the nuclear power plant. So just like a fossil fuel plant, a nuclear power plant boils water to produce electricity. But instead of using burning or instead of burning fuel, the heat of the nuclear power plant comes from the fission of uranium-235. The fuel is an atom that is splitting up. And during the splitting up of this atom, energy is released. That energy converted into heat. And as you can see here, this is a schematic diagram of a pressurized water. There's a separation of the loops. This is just simplified, okay? So this is there's a loop here where you have the radioactive materials, and then this heat is transferred from this primary loop into this secondary loop, where heat is or where water is boiled. And the steam generated then runs the turbine. Now, just like any thermal system, you also need something here that removes the excess heat from the power plant or from the system, and we call that heat sink. This is not a new concept. It's just like the exhaust in our cars, so if you notice kapag sa aircon natin, no, sa likod ng aircon, mainit siya kasi the kailangan yung nire-remove na heat from the room has to be released in the environment. So somehow similar dun yung concept nito. Excess heat should be removed from the system and through the circulating water system. So what are the typical heat sinks na ginagamit? So you will see na many nuclear power plants are constructed near a large body of water. And kapag so meron siyang intake ng water, and that is circulated para i-condense yung water dun sa system, and then the outgoing water will be a bit hotter. Pero ano yung expected initiation temperature dito? About 2 to 5 degrees Celsius lang. Now, what if you don't have a large body of water? Is it not possible to have a nuclear power plant anymore? Pwede pa din. In that case, pwedeng gumawa ng forced draft cooling tower where you have the water, yung outgoing steam na mainit ay meron may literally fans na pinapalamig siya so that it will be condensed. So that's the forced draft. But when you search for nuclear power plant, what you often see is itong merong may mga cooling tower. And this is just like the concept nitong sa may draft cooling tower, except that for the cooling tower, it advantage dun sa natural convection. So this usually this tower is about 400 meters high. It's a really large structure. And as the steam rises, lumalamig siya and it condenses. So what you see when you see this steam here, or these are actually clouds and they are not radioactive. So walang nai-emit na radioactive dito sa mga cooling tower. Now, we mentioned that the fuel for a nuclear power plant is uranium. What is uranium? It is a naturally occurring element that's relatively common in the crust of the Earth. It is a metal approximately as common as tin or zinc, and it can be found in rocks and even in the sea. So, nandiyan siya sa paligid natin. But the question is the quality of the uranium. Pwede ba siya na magamit for fuel? So, this is how the quality of uranium can be graded. At ang pinakamandang grade ng uranium, or one of the best grades of uranium, is found in Canada with about 20% uranium found in ore. Okay? Now, when uranium is removed from the earth, it contains about 99.3% uranium-238 and 0.7% uranium-235. And in most nuclear power plants, ang usable dito sa dalawang ito ay yung uranium-235. But you can see, mas maliit yung percentage na. We will talk about that more later. There are other fissile materials that can be used, like polonium-239. But this is not a natural material, but they can be produced in the reactor when this uranium-238 is absorbed neutron and then it decays into plutonium-239. Plutonium-241 can also form, also artificial, when plutonium-240 captures a neutron in power reactors. Another fissile material or fuel material that is being explored is uranium-233, which comes from a natural source, thorium-232. And this can be produced only if thorium-232 is irradiated in a reactor. It transmutes and decays into uranium-233. So most commercial power plants right now are running with uranium-235 as the main fuel. Okay? Now, how does uranium as a nuclear fuel or as a fuel compare with other sources of energy? So here we have a rough comparison of the energy density. Suppose you burn 1 kilogram of food, you get about 10 megajoules of energy. For ethanol, 26.8 and so on. So what you can see here, for natural uranium, you can get 5 orders of magnitude higher na energy, while reactor grade uranium, about 6 orders of magnitude greater yung energy na makukuha natin. If we try to plot that in a chart, you see halos nakita yung mga sources. That is because all this materials here, when we try to extract the energy, what we do is burning. It's a chemical reaction. Pero ito, these are nuclear reactions, and nuclear reactions releases more energy per Now, let's say we were able to get the uranium from the mine. First, let me share an analogy. Familiar siguro tayo, mas familiar siguro tayo sa crude oil. So when crude oil is removed from an oil depot, hindi naman agad pwedeng gamitin sa sasakyan natin yan or sa kerosene, kailangan dumaan siya sa refining process. In the same way, ganun din yung sa uranium. Pag buha siya sa minahan, hindi agad pwedeng isalpak sa reactor. It has to go through what we call the front end of the nuclear fuel cycle. So from the mine, uranium ore is obtained, and then it is milled o tinatanggal yung mga non-uranium, mga other materials. It is transformed into uranium yellow cake. So it's called yellow cake, as you can see, because of its appearance. Now remember that the natural uranium only has 0.7% U-235, and it has to, most nuclear power plants needs higher percentage of U-235, and that can only be achieved if this is transformed into gaseous uranium hexafluoride, which can then go through a series of centrifugation to enrich uranium. Ang ibig sabihin ng uranium enrichment, we're increasing the percentage of uranium-235. So from 0.72%, which is the natural, to about 3% uranium-235, or about 5% for some commercial power. Then from here, the uranium is converted or pelletized, and then it is assembled in a fuel rod and then in a fuel assembly. And in this from here, it cannot be used in the power reactor. So just a bit more information about the enrichment. Again, this is natural uranium, 0.7% uranium-235, 99.3% uranium-38, and it goes through enrichment through centrifugation usually to become low enriched uranium with about 3 to 5% uranium-235. So that's for commercial reactors. But advanced designs are now exploring high assay low enriched uranium. So this is a low enriched with about 5 to 19.75% uranium-235. So there is this limit up to about 20%, which defines your low enriched uranium. And all civil nuclear reactors has that limit. That is to prevent proliferation of nuclear materials. But for some military reactors, for example, naval reactors, they have fuel that has up to 90% uranium-235. Why am I talking more about this? Because this is a concern. This addresses two things. One is there is this concern that nuclear fuel in a power reactor can be used as a weapon. It cannot, because for you to have it cannot be used as a nuclear bomb. It cannot be used as a nuclear bomb because for you to have a bomb, you have to have more than 90% enrichment. So if a risk or someone, but if a malicious person would like to get nuclear fuel from a reactor, he had to do a lot of work before he could make a bomb out of it. So it will not be very attractive to get to enrich uranium to make it into a nuclear bomb. So again, most of the 500 commercial nuclear power reactors operating or under construction in the world today require uranium enriched or has more composition of uranium, or more concentrated composition of uranium-235 isotope in their fuel. Now, okay, so we already have the fuel assembly and it's already in the reactor. What happens inside the reactor? Let's say we start with about 3% of uranium-235 and the rest is uranium-238. After 1 year of being used in the reactor, it is burning up. We call that burning up. It fissions. It continuously fissions. What happens is more more fission fragments are produced, and here after 1 year of running, after 1 year in the reactor, the uranium-235 is just 2%. After 2 years, it's almost 1%. After 3 years, it's less than 1%, almost comparable to the naturally occurring uranium-235. So at this point, the fuel is not anymore usable in the reactor because it has a lot of these fission fragments or fission products, which are actually neutron absorbers, which makes the fuel less efficient. So the fuel has to be removed from the core na. Aside from that, pag masyadong matagal na rin yung fuel in the reactor core, we also have to look into the integrity of the cladding. And we don't want the cladding to fail because we don't want these products to be released into the environment. So sa totoo lang, kung pwede pa talaga siyang gamitin. But based on policies and also regulations, after some time, kailangan yung fuel na remove na sa reactor core. Now, what happens if after na matagal na yung fuel from the reactor core? So from the power reactor, the fuel is still generating a lot of heat because of the fission product decay. So they have to be stored in spent fuel storage, usually underwater, to remove the heat. After years of decay, they will be ready for transport, and they will be sent into a facility for spent fuel encapsulation, and then final disposal. So that's the first option. There is also this option of recycling the fuel. So from the power reactor, again, it will be stored in a spent fuel storage. It will be transported, but instead of going straight to disposal, it will go through our processing plant. In our processing plant, uranium, remember that uranium is still usable. There's still some portion that's uranium-235, and plutonium is produced in the fuel. That can be recovered and that can be manufactured again into a fuel which is usable in a reactor. And the rest of the waste is separated. So there's a lower volume of waste in this case. And then this will be going to disposal. So this might, in concept, this is an attractive option, but very few countries are choosing this policy because of proliferation concerns. But again, we have this option just in case. But for more details about the other options about the spent fuel, you can go to this document. It's easily searchable in Google. And you see here that there are 8 options that are being considered. And in this document, there are expert opinion on this back end for the fuel. And they provide inputs or assessment of these options based on the safety, security, and non-proliferation, economic, political, legal, and societal effects or societal assessments of these options. Another thing that is issue field is radioactive waste. So what I am showing here is the different ways that wastes are being managed. Actually, the waste management system of the nuclear field is second to none. The approach is from cradle to grave. From the moment that they are produced, even to the mining part, up to the enrichment on the whole fuel cycle, all radioactive waste are accounted for and all are managed. And it's only the nuclear field that takes that much care of its waste. And yeah, you've seen the difference of the energy that can be provided per unit gram or per unit mass of fuel. So this is an illustration of how much waste would be produced in nuclear compared to other sources. Another issue that is a main concern of many stakeholders is our nuclear accidents. So of course, we're familiar with the 3 Mile Island accident that occurred in 1979. So this is just a summary. No one killed, no one was injured. Radiation was released from the plant, but the releases were not serious and were not health hazards. But public confidence is severely damaged. Chernobyl 1986 is the worst. So 31 workers, mostly firefighters, were killed, largely due to acute radiation exposure. There were huge release of radioactive material around Europe, and world confidence is severely damaged on nuclear. But there is some opinion that the greatest damage was from fear or psychological and not really from radiation. And most recent is the Fukushima accident, which occurred in 2011. UN reports that any radiation-induced effect from Fukushima would be too small to identify. People were well protected and received low or very low radiation. In fact, the mass movement of people during evacuation had repercussions of its own. What I would like to share about these 3 accidents is that the nuclear field has more than 60 years of peaceful use, but it is marred by these 3 nuclear accidents. It's just like after doing a lot of things na maganda, ang napansin kadalasan ng tao yung mali. So that's something to reflect on siguro. When we, of course, these accidents happen, we do not deny that they are serious, but we have to look at it in perspective dun sa buong track record ng nuclear. On safety of nuclear power plants, safety, actually, all nuclear power plants and all nuclear facilities apply this concept of what we call defense in depth. So it just means na layers ng defense or layers ng barrier, and it is illustrated here. I will not go into detail, but it's just that if this barrier, fuel pa lang, may protection na siya, it confines the fission products or the radioactive nuclear waste that I mentioned earlier. It's already a confinement. If that fails, there's a second barrier. If that fails, there's another barrier, and so on. So that is what is meant by the defense in depth. And there are 3 fundamental safety functions in a nuclear power plant. That is control of activity. That means control controlling neurons, which controls the fission or controls the amount of heat generated by the core. It's also confinement of radioactive material to ensure that no radioactive material is released above the limits, and to cool the fuel. So the fuel is generating heat, whether it's inside the reactor, and once it's just removed from the reactor after high burn up, the function of the plant is to remove the heat from to make sure that it will not melt. So the worst thing that can happen to a power plant really is that the fuel melts. And when the fuel melts, there's a possibility that radioactive will be released. And these safe functions are performed by different systems, structures, and components in a nuclear power plant. And here are just some examples. Nuclear power plants have steel-lined reinforced concrete containment. It has a pressure vessel which rounds protect the core. It has a fuel assembly which holds the uranium from that fissions. It has control rods. The function of that is to control the reactivity. It regulates the speed of fission reactions. It controls the heat. It controls the heat also in the system. Generator, it slows down the neutron. And coolant, it removes the heat from the reactor core. From the fuel, I mentioned earlier that the enriched uranium is formed into fuel pellets. The fuel is in the form of ceramic pellets, which has a very high melting point, so more about 3,000 degrees Celsius. But reactors are operating just a few hundreds, a normal operation, a few hundreds of degrees Celsius. So there's a huge limit between the operating temperature and the limit and the melting point of the uranium fuel. So it has to be a very large accident before the fuel can melt. Concentration of fissionable uranium-235 is low, and there's more uranium-238, which tends to slow down the chain reaction as uranium-238 gets hotter. Also, the radioactive byproducts from fission remains locked safely inside the ceramic pellets. Okay? And here's an example of a steel-lined reinforced concrete. You see how thick it is and how many steel is used to reinforce the concrete for the containment. In fact, these containments are designed in a way that they are even an airplane crash is foreseen as a possible scenario. Okay. Again, just to see how thick the containments are. Okay. So nuclear power plants employ multiple redundant safety systems. 2 or more safety systems perform key functions independently. If one fails, there's a backup. And they're not just redundant, they're also independent. That means if one fails, it will not influence the other. And most systems are reliably automated. There are built-in sensors, so it monitors temperature, pressure, or water level, and other indicators or parameters important to safety. And once the sensors registers a number that's beyond a certain limit, it will shut down the reactors. That's what we call a protection system. So that's the safety of nuclear power plants, and just to establish that it is one of the priorities of nuclear operators when establishing a nuclear power plant. About the risk of radiation. So a lot of people are afraid of being exposed to radiation. And we acknowledge that exposure to very high levels of radiation can cause radiation sickness, such as skin burns and dehydration. It may also result in long-term health effects, such as cancer and cardiovascular diseases. But just again to look at it in perspective. First of all, there's no such thing as a zero risk activity. Here's a comparison of radiation levels. So there is natural radiation around us, and that is about 2 millisievert in a year. That's natural radiation. Everywhere we go, there is radiation. The limit for radiation workers is 20 millisievert, averaged over 5 years. In a single year, the dose limit is 50 millisievert, but you see that this is way below the threshold for start of radiation sickness symptoms. And just to share with you, we are working in a nuclear facility with nuclear fuel. And by studying all possible scenarios and all possible activities with our nuclear fuel, the maximum, the projected maximum amount of exposure that we could have in any single year is marked here, about 60 millisievert for the whole year. And here's another diagram to illustrate the relative risk. So when you fly, or when you have a round trip between Tokyo to New York, the amount of radiation that you receive is even higher than the radiation level that is received by people living in a nuclear power plant in a year. And you see here, you are exposed to radiation when you eat food, when you go through a CT scan that's quite high, and so on. Even natural radiation in Brazil is higher, so about 10 millisievert. Millisievert is a unit of radiation dose. Another illustration of relative risk. So this is from this reference. This presents the thousands of days loss of life expectancy for different activities. When you see the asterisk, it's average. This is US data. We don't have local data yet. So the asterisk here represents an average data, while those that has no asterisk are based on people who are involved in that activity. So you see here, this is for alcoholism, about 4,000 of days lost, poverty, smoking, and so on. This is motor vehicle accidents, and to continue this in this next chart, it's multiplied by 20. So ito po yung motor vehicle accident. Ito average to for people involved, and then so on. And then here's the bicycles, and ito ulit yun. So yung riding bicycles, ito yung figure niya. And then, so this is already in days, kasi times 1,000, ito thousands of days. And where do we find nuclear here? So here's nuclear here. Here's nuclear. So people are so afraid of nuclear, but the estimated, based on operational record, based on this data, it actually has less risk compared to other normal activities that we're usually doing. How many people are using nuclear power in the world? So let's look into the global status of nuclear power. So this is a 2017 data. I just checked the 2020 data. Just comparable naman yung result. So in 2017, 10.6% of the world electricity production is from nuclear source. For 2020, it's about 10.1%. Majority is still from coal, 39.3%. We know is a major emitter of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So this is the nuclear electricity production. What do we see here? West and so we see here that Asia, that there's an increasing trend in Asia here. This is just until 2016, but if we continue this to 2020 with China as the fastest growing nuclear country in the world, this percentage would even be higher. This one is more recent. As of August 2020, there are 440 nuclear power plants that are operating, 55 under construction. These are the leading countries. USA has 95 nuclear power plants operation, 2 are under construction. France has 56 power plants, 1 in construction. China has 48, 11 under construction, and so on. So why nuclear power? One of the reasons why so many countries are why many countries are pursuing nuclear is because of nuclear energy security. Nuclear power can contribute to energy security by stably supplying fuel regardless of the global energy landscape. So this is a comparison of the projection of the availability of different fuel, at least for fuel. The projection is for oil. It can provide energy for about 40 years. Liquefied natural gas, 65. Coal, about 155 years. Uranium is 230 years. And this is not considering all other fissile materials. Mostly this is just uranium-235, and it also is not considered the possibility of reprocessing yet. On carbon, another reason why some countries are going nuclear, because it is a green source of energy. According to IAEA, this is the data of carbon dioxide emission by energy source. Coal is the number one emitter with about 991 gram per kilowatt hour, and nuclear, already considering the whole nuclear cycle, is about 10 gram per kilowatt hour. And if there were no power, remember that the world's electricity supply is 10% from nuclear. If that's even removed, the world's total carbon dioxide emission would increase by 10%. Another reasonable supply of electricity, as shown in one of the previous slides, the high energy density of uranium guarantees a stable supply of electricity. One load of fuel can generate power for more than 18 months. And here's another comparison. 1 gram of uranium, the energy that we can get from 1 gram of uranium is equivalent to the energy that we can get from 9 drums, or about 1,200 liters of oil, or about 3 tons of coal. And that means that the corresponding waste from these sources will also be proportional to these volumes. So the pros and cons, of course, we acknowledge the disadvantages also of nuclear power. In terms of economics, the advantages are nuclear power plants are cheap to operate due to low fuel cost, but the upfront capital cost can be difficult to finance. It is stable, and it has predictable generating costs. It has long lifetime. It has supply security because of insurances. However, it is sensitive to interest rates. It has long lead times, planning, construction, and so on. Long payback periods. Also, there are risks on the regulatory aspect, quality, and in terms of market issues. There's also a lot of questions in the from the registration about the Bataan nuclear power plant. So here's a brief history. It's a sad story. So in 1976, contract signed. We were one of the first in Southeast Asia to have a contract signed for a nuclear power plant. Sorry. In 1977, there was an IAEA safety mission conducted to review the preliminary safety analysis report of the BNPP. By 1978, there's another IAEA safety mission for the geological review or for the site. By 1979, April, the Philippine Atomic Energy Commission, which is now the PNRI, issued the construction permit. But you know what happened in 1979 is the 3 Mile Island, and that stopped the construction. So it suspended construction, and the Puno Commission was conducted, which included stakeholder or public consultation again. And after the consultation completed, full construction resumed in 1981. In 1984, the hot functional test was completed, and initial synchronization to the grid was conducted. 1985, public hearings began for plant licensing. However, in 1986, the Bataan nuclear power plant was mothballed. Okay, so is the design of the Bataan nuclear power plant. It's the supplier for the reactor system is Westinghouse. The turbine generator is supplied also by Westinghouse. That's the architectural engineer. It was supposed to generate 620 megawatt of electricity. These are the specifications for its reactor pressure vessel. This is the fuel. So the Bataan nuclear power plant is a pressure water reactor. And here's an example of a fuel assembly, a pressurized water reactor. On the earthquake design parameters, it's designed for safe shutdown at 0.4 G, but it can still safely operate at zero point 0.2 G. Here's the an illustration of its containment, and just to appreciate the size of this. So you can see the red part here. This is the relative size of a person compared to this structure. Okay, so it's really a huge structure. There are actually nuclear power plants similar to the Bataan nuclear power plant. There's Kori 1 in South Korea, which first operated in 1977, and it has just shut down in 2017. So it's very recent. There's also Angra 1 and 2 in Brazil. That started in 1982, and it's still operating until now. We also have Krishko nuclear power plant. I had the chance to visit this together with Dr. Celia in 2017, and it is still operating until now. It started operating in 1981. So just like the Bataan nuclear power plant, these three nuclear power plants are also built by Westinghouse, and throughout their several decades of operation, no grave problems have been encountered. And yeah, they have a safety record. But please take note that in ongoing studies for the possible inclusion of nuclear in the energy mix, it's not only the Bataan nuclear power plant that is being considered. There are also other designs there are different designs of reactor, but it's probably, we probably don't have enough time to discuss that. But just to give you a brief overview of the different designs. So this is this is a very simplified illustration of the Bataan nuclear power plant design. And I've discussed this in one of the previous slides. You have three loops here that are completely separate. The primary loop, the secondary loop, and then this circulating water system here. So this is a pressurized water reactor design, and that's the ENPP, the Bataan nuclear power plant design. The most recent accident happened in Fukushima. Many people are asking, what if a Fukushima kind of accident happens in a country, let's say DNPP? It cannot, in a sense, because they have very different designs. One of the main things you will see here is that there's no secondary loop. From the boiling of the water is directly boiled in the core, in the reactor vessel, and there's radioactive steam that goes through the turbine, but radioactivity is still not released to the environment because this circulating water system is isolated from this loop. So there's a huge difference in the design. So these kinds of design are actually generation 2 design. Most of the nuclear power plants under construction now are generation 3 or 4, which are advanced designs, advanced pressurized water reactor or advanced boiling water reactor. And they are more efficient designs, and they feature more inherent safety features. But aside from advanced designs, there's also what we call innovative design. So these are large departures from generation 2 design. They have limited operational, there's limited operational experience for these kinds of design, but they feature significant safety improvements. So an example of that are small modular reactors. There are different countries have different designs for small modular reactors, but those that are in the advanced phase of the development of the design are USA and Korea. For USA, their design, last I checked, their design is still under regulatory review, but for Korea, the smart design, it's already a licensed design. So summary of nuclear power today, it's a proven technology that provides clean electricity at predictable and competitive costs, more than 17,000 years of accumulated reactor experience. Operation of nuclear installations have safety as highest priority. Any accidents that occurred in the past, lessons are learned. In fact, after the Fukushima accident, the safety standards around the world were revised, and all nuclear power plants went through this stress test and had to be reassessed based on new knowledge learned from the Fukushima accident. The industry safety record is second to none, and nuclear takes full responsibility for all its waste. These are references, and Thank you. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Astronomo, for that very informative presentation. Our third speaker is Dr. Carlo Arcilia. Dr. Arcilia is the director of the Philippine Nuclear Research Institute. He graduated with a PhD in geotechnical engineering and geosciences from the University of Illinois at Chicago. A proven expert in the field of geology, Dr. Arcilia previously served as director of the National Institute of Geological Sciences, or NIGS, at the University of the Philippines, Diliman. He has also been involved in nuclear related research for more than a decade, particularly in studies on nuclear waste disposal. He was also recently recognized as one of the Asian Scientist 100 for this year. May we all give a warm welcome to Dr. Carlo Arcilia.
All right. All right. So good morning, everyone. So my topic is not an easy one. It's supposed to be okay. I apologize. I got the wrong presentation. So I'll yeah. How do I do this? All right. Good morning, everyone. I hope my volume is better. But anyway, so I'll try to talk about debunking nuclear myths, and it's not an easy topic because every time you talk about nuclear, people think about bomb. But first, a happy picture. This is the picture of the Earth at night from NASA, and we can see from this photograph that the energy distribution and use of the world is not democratic, but the brightest areas actually have nuclear power. Nuclear power accounts for about 10% of the world's energy supply. And I think that has been explained by the previous lecturer. But this is the problem with nuclear. There are so many movies. For example, this one in '83, and it was very dramatic the day after, the China Syndrome. So there's so many movies that portray nuclear as bad. Even some more recent ones, Mission Impossible, Tom Cruise, all of these are. And then there's a negative perception of the atom and radiation based on lack of knowledge and truth. And then, of course, I haven't mentioned even the Chernobyl series that was just recently shown in HBO. Now, here's a statue of the birth of the nuclear age in the campus of the University of Chicago, close to where I did my PhD. Here's the first nuclear reactor, the Chicago Pile, and the guy there is going to be the one to insert the control rods. The list of the people in that experiment, a lot of them are, quite a number of them are Nobel Prize winners. The 23 of the first criticality, only two women. So I think that has changed so much better now. But the facts, I think, have been shown to you by my colleague. These are the nuclear facts, 450 nuclear power plants. I don't have to go through this. And one of the most important features of nuclear is that its orders of magnitude energy density compared to other sources of fuel. This shows this. For example, one pellet produces energy of 1.5 tons of coal. Okay. And for example, if you were standing in front of a nuclear power plant, the BNPP, you would actually receive more dose from eating one banana because there's no radiation coming because of the shielding. And why nuclear power? Again, because it's a green source of energy, very low CO2 footprint, And in fact, IPCC has said that without nuclear, you cannot reach the, the carbon targets of the world. Okay. A very important factor that people are not so knowledgeable about is the capacity factor of the energy sources. Nuclear has over 90%, and wind and solar consistently are 30 or even percent less. This would mean then that the solar and wind would actually need backup plants, no? And typically that will be coal now or expensive batteries. Nuclear can serve as very reliable backup for wind and solar. So that's why I would rather frame it as why not solar, wind, and nuclear, because all three are actually carbon, are almost carbon free or very low carbon footprints. And by the way, wind actually kills more people per unit of energy than nuclear, very much. And this is a tragic photo of people trapped in a windmill. And solar panels produce a lot of waste too, as compared to nuclear by volume. Very important, 1 megawatt of solar requires 1 hectare of flat land. Therefore, cost of nuclear plants in the Philippines will require 108 times less land than solar. And this will probably be agricultural land and 400 times less area than wind. Ultimately, though, wind and solar are nuclear energy because it comes from fusion. Of course, nuclear energy is on Earth that we want to do that's useful now is fission. And this slide comes from Dr. Jim Green, pictured me here 2-3 years ago. Jim Green is now the chief scientist of NASA. Was very gracious in taking a photograph with me. Treasure this photograph. The reactors have been talked about from the previous speakers. I will not dwell on this. It's the most common one. But there are 400 plus nuclear power plants in the world. Now, actually about 100 in America. So people who say nuclear is unsafe, why does America have 100 nuclear power plants? Okay. Why does France have almost 60 nuclear power plants? And even in Asia, UAE just finished 4 nuclear power plants. One is already active, and even Bangladesh is going to have nuclear power soon. Egypt is going to have nuclear power soon. So why nuclear? Because it's competitive with gas and coal and provides energy security. By the way, nuclear is energy. Uranium is easier sourced than coal. And most importantly, the median Filipino family pays more than 10% of its monthly income for electricity. And this could be the reason why 79% of the people support nuclear power as per a DOE survey in just last year. And Malampaya is running out in 5 years. What will we replace this with? Best options would be maybe a combination of imported liquefied natural gas along with nuclear energy. You know, last week, or I think 2 weeks ago, last week, the DOE said that drilling can happen now, again, in the West Philippine Sea. But even if they found something like a Malampaya, it will take more than a decade before they can actually convert that into usable energy. Here's the BNPP, and built at a huge cost, $2.3 billion. And this is one of the things that I wanted to debunk today, because when you talk about Bataan Nuclear Power Plant, people will still mention that it's situated close to or a dormant volcano and built on top of a fault. If the Bataan Nuclear Power Plant were a coal plant, it actually, if it continued as nuclear, by the way, the nuclear fuel will last 18 months, and all the fuel will fit in a jeepney. And the cost will be something like $20 million for 18 months. But if it were a 620 megawatt coal plant, the coal will have to be imported. And the importation cost for that 50 Panamax ships, a Panamax ship hosts about 50,000 tons, will be $600 million. Believe it or not, South Korea has proposed that the BNPP can be rehabilitated for $1 billion. So if that was accepted, it would mean that that investment of the rehabilitation will be recovered in less than 2 to 3 years from the importation cost alone. So we did a study a few years ago with some colleagues, Richard Antonio and then Mario Collado, and one of our colleagues already died. Is there a fault beneath the nuclear power plant? It's a systematic study using electrical resistivity, seismic refraction, and radiant gas detection. The study aimed to test if the BNPP is located on top of an active fault. It does not seek to study the location of faults beside or close to the structure because this can be covered by the engineering design. But if there's a fault beneath the BNPP, this will condemn the structure immediately and absolutely because faults are very, very deep and the plant cannot be proven as safe. I would not sign in if there's a fault beneath the BNPP. And PNRI, we are the regulators for nuclear power. The origin for the fault partly comes from a published paper by a colleague of mine, Mahar Lagmay, in 2012. There's a Lubao fault there. You can see that there's a certain line, and if they extended this, that's why these are called dashed lines because it's not sure, and the BNPP is here. So from this scale, it looks like the fault it hits BNPP. But if you expand the scale, then you're not sure exactly whether it hits the BNPP. Active faults, by definition, must have superficial manifestations. And the active fault of the fieldwork does not list an active fault in the vicinity of the BNPP. So we did electrical resistivity, seismic refraction, and geochemical fault detection by radiant gas survey. The results, which I don't have time to show you here, 9 lines of resistivity lines are put out along the perimeter, and the evidence, there's no evidence of faults beneath the Bataan nuclear plant from the electrical resistivity. Now, the seismic refraction, we also can conclude there are no faults beneath the Bataan nuclear power plant. And then the third test, radon and thoron gas testing, is geochemical detection of hidden faults. It's another independent test. Here are the data. X-axis is the radon content. This works this way, by the way. If there's an active fault, subterranean gases like radon will be able to go to the surface through the fault. For example, this West Marikina Valley fault, WMVS, is a West Marikina Valley fault. It's a fault, by the way, that I named in a paper in 1980s. So it's basically my fault. And you can see the readings of the radon, 40,000 to 70,000. In the BNPP, the data, 10,000 below. So there are no faults beneath the Bataan nuclear plant from 3 lines of evidence. So anyone who's going to say there's a fault beneath, they have to disprove the data that we obtained. So that's number 1 fake news about the BNPP. There's no fault beneath the nuclear plant. If it's beside, then can the engineering handle that kind? And I'll talk more about that later on. What about the volcanic risk? It's the age of the volcano. There were pyroclastic flows from Mount Natib, mapped close to BNPP, but there are only 2 reliable age dates by carbon-14, 27,000 and 60,000 years. This is very important, these ages, because if we look at Metro Manila and volcanoes, where 10 million people living in the radius of Laguna de Bay volcanoes are volcanoes in the lake. Many people don't know this. These are younger than Mount Natib and much more explosive in the past. The explosion of Laguna de Bay created what we call the adobe. Adobe is found ubiquitously in Metro Manila. Galing po yan lahat sa eruption ng Laguna de Bay volcanoes roughly 20,000 years ago. Younger than Mount Natib in Bataan. And by the way, volcanic eruptions can be predicted than earthquakes. Okay, and this is not scientifically proven. Okay, so these are just this photo from Ronnie Torres Pivok shows you where, by the way, this is Laguna de Bay, very shallow now. That's Taal there. The last eruption of this Taal, the really major one causing most of this material to come out, is about 6,000 years. This line here is the West Marikina Valley Fault. Okay. So Manila is surrounded by volcanoes, active and inactive. So if we follow the defective reasoning for closing the Bataan nuclear plant as saying it's also a volcano, then the cities of Manila and Angeles Clark should never have been built in the first place. Clark had a Pinatubo eruption last 1990, about 30 years ago. The closure of the nuclear facility was very painful economically. The single largest debt item in the Philippines. It was a poor country until April 2007, paying $180,000 per day just on interest payments because we did not use the facility. By the way, South Korea's nuclear plant, Cory 2, which is the same design as the BNPP, was recovered in less than 6 years because they were getting the revenues from selling the electricity from the nuclear power. This resulted in the closure of the BNPP in crippling power failures in the 1990s. This is also documented fact with untold economic losses, and this opened the crippling power failures opened the floodgates to a maze of independent power suppliers, which has made power very expensive. So this is actually one of the reasons why our electricity is very expensive now. Here's some pictures of Bataan Nuclear Power Plant. Here is the 620 megawatt 620 megawatt turbine. This is to debunk, again, a myth saying na naubos na, kinahoy na raw lahat ng gamit sa BNPP. Not true. Fake news number 2. Okay? Here is the inside of the reactor. Of course, some of the things will have to be changed now. That's Marco Wanko there. And here's inside the nuclear power plant. That's the steam generator. That's the reactor top. It's all there still, brand new, never used. Okay. People say Chernobyl. Don't blame because Chernobyl. In fact, this is the reasons used by then the people behind Corazon Aquino, saying that in '86 Chernobyl happened. Let's close this because Chernobyl just happened. That's understandable at the time, but then what's happening is this: it's a converted weapon type design. There's no containment structure. Very important, and I call it. This is the most important thing. If there's an accident, the materials are blown out. Here's the containment structure of the BNPP. The materials, if there's an accident, will remain inside the containment structure. The design of the plant is also unstable. It's a graphite, subjectable to fire. So if you watch Chernobyl, please consider the facts of the Chernobyl plant vis-a-vis a modern plant. When I say a modern plant, the BNPP is still younger than about 60% of the running nuclear plants in the world because nuclear power plants have been operating for almost 60 years, and then some of them will be extended for a license for about 80 years. That's how resilient the nuclear power plants are. Now, very important, our BNPP has 3 sisters, exact same design. Angra in Brazil, Crisco in Slovenia. I have been to Crisco, and Cory 2 in Korea. Cory 2, as I said, in about less than 6 years, they recovered the cost, and it gave rise to 4 nuclear plants. Nanganak na ng 4 na nuclear plants sa Cory 2. Okay? And here's Angra. All of these plants are operating now, operating almost 40 years, very profitably and safely. That's Crisco. There's a planted to corn, and then there's a wine a vineyard close to it. Cory 2, and then all right. Now let's talk about Fukushima, because Fukushima said, "Oh, let's operate. We have a lot of earthquakes here," and then Fukushima got destroyed. First, the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant is the oldest nuclear plant in Japan, and its seismic acceleration for the building is 0.18 G, and BNPP is 0.4 G. So BNPP is actually about 3 times stronger than the Bataan nuclear plant. But the more important thing is that a magnitude 9 earthquake that happened in Japan did not destroy the nuclear plant. It survived the magnitude 9 earthquake, and we haven't had magnitude 9 earthquake in the Philippines. What actually caused the explosion here is that during the earthquake, a tsunami followed, and it so happened that the cooling and the cooling diesel engines for the reactor were installed in the basement, and it flooded them. By the way, the managers of the Japanese were already told in an earlier study that it's a risk from tsunami if their basement were flooded, and it became true. So I think it was also mentioned the last time that after Fukushima, all the 450 plants in the world did the Fukushima stress test. Now, if you reopen the BNPP, Why will it not be subject to that? Because it's about 19 meters above the sea level. The tsunami that Fukushima was 15 meters from magnitude 9. Okay, the cause of this, I mean, I'll leave that to that. But you know, it's now even James Hansen has said that the nuclear power has saved millions of lives by preventing the burning of fossil fuels. And electricity consumption is proposed to development. For example, the Philippines is somewhere here. This is electrical energy consumption per capita, and then human development index on the y-axis. The Philippines is here. Korea is somewhere here. Had we opened the nuclear plant, we would be somewhere there, up there. And just to illustrate that fact, the Daya Bay nuclear power plant in Shenzhen, China opened in 1993, supplying Hong Kong electricity. Daya Bay was, or Shenzhen was a fishing village. Now, the fishing village surpasses Hong Kong in GDP. And a big part of that can be attributed to its electricity consumption because of the factories that they have there. So this is the thing, these are the things that would have happened had we not stopped the Bataan nuclear plant. The top Philippine scientists also support the nuclear power as a part of the energy mix. That's last year. National Academy of Science and Technology came with a paper saying that we should consider nuclear power. I'm confident that our scientists at PNRI will be able to extract uranium from Philippine seawater using radiation-induced polymer graphene. Why is this important? Because if they do that, de facto, it will make nuclear energy almost like renewables. And in fact, I think China has considered, if it has considered this. So de facto, nuclear can be renewable. So what are some of the arguments that why you don't want nuclear? We've discussed Chernobyl, we've discussed Fukushima. Oh, what about disposing of spent fuel? I'll discuss that later on. And newer technologies have significantly lower risk. This is also discussed by the previous speaker. Gravity-driven system, the modular, the SMRs, basically. Now, the waste management. Where will you put the nuclear waste? Fortunately for the Philippines, we are #2 in the world in geothermal. We have the technology to drill greater than 2-kilometer deep boreholes. Okay, so my proposed system, if you're going to dispose of nuclear waste, we put the waste inside boreholes and plug this with bentonite, which will prevent nuclides from reaching the surface and groundwater. Then you select an isolated island, the borehole site, which can adequately store all the future waste safely. So we have many thousands of islands that we can select, and if you're at the surface, they will actually earn money, the people and the residents, because they can charge a premium for allowing the waste to be deposited. I'm willing to live in that island, by the way, for those who are skeptics there, because I believe in this technology. I've studied this technology personally myself for more than 10 years. And actually, I have a candidate island. This island is being claimed by a foreign power, and if we put the waste here, it will be an added disincentive. What about the Philippines? EO-116 is there, and we will be studying the possibility of how to insert nuclear power. It could be new builds, it could be revival of the Bataan nuclear plant. That's just one option. And there are offers on the table. South Korea is interested, $1 billion. It could be SMRs, etc. Except these are still going to be said in the next few. The challenges of nuclear power will be who will be the electricity buyers, and one possibility are those islands that don't have connection to the grid. Their electricity is very expensive. Some governors have actually expressed interest. I think Palawan has expressed interest. I was in Tarlac last week. They said that after presentation to the provincial government, that they are willing to consider locating a nuclear plant inside their boundaries because, for example, the nuclear city is within Tarlac and the electricity is very expensive. Okay, there are some challenges to stakeholders not in their backyards. Again, many of these are due to perceptions. There are some regulatory and legislative challenges that we are trying to overcome, and the rapid expansion of a depleted nuclear human resource base. All of this can be solved. So That's my presentation. So nuclear power, as I said, maybe nuclear power is it is a viable option for the Philippines, especially since our electricity is very expensive. It is safe. We can dispose of the waste, and it will hopefully push us into industrialization. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Arcilia, for that very enlightening presentation. We will now proceed to the open forum to answer your questions for the speakers. And I am here with Sir George Sahagun, the President of the Philippine Young Generation in Nuclear. We are very sure that there are a lot of questions from our curious audience. Sir George?
Hello everyone, good morning, and I'm pretty sure na nag-enjoy po tayo sa presentation ng ating mga, mga ginagalang ng mga speakers. Thank you very much, Dr. Arcilia and Dr. Astronomo. Right now, we're now on one of the most awaited portion of our webinar. So may we request the presence of Dr. Arcilia and Dr. Astronomo to answer the following questions. So before we proceed to the Q&A, isa lang pong reminders that later on, those who want to have their certificates, we will flash in the screen yung link so that you can answer the survey, and then you can have your e-certificates. So the questions that I will be flashing here will be those questions na nakalap natin na we gather together doon sa mga nag-register. So, makarami ng questions, but then we will try to answer as many as we can. So, here we go. For the first question, okay. So I would like to read the first question. Is nuclear energy safe in the Philippines?
It's a very good question, a very fair question. That's why, for example, in the consideration for in EEO 116, PVOX and PAG-ASA are involved. Okay, the siting of nuclear power plants require a safe geologic siting. Okay, now fortunately, there are countries that have seismic risks similar to us that have nuclear power plants. Japan, of course, has more than 50. Of course, the Fukushima incident happened, but I would argue that the Fukushima incident in Japan strengthened the nuclear option because they survived. It survived the magnitude 9 earthquake. It was the wrong design to put the diesel engines. That was the cause of the accident. The spreading. Okay. Now typhoons. The nuclear plants are built to withstand the crash of a big airplane, and they can easily handle typhoons. And this is one, actually, the typhoons per year is one disincentive for solar and wind. So I would say there are provisions for the geographic. Actually, it's not only the geographic but geological locations, ring of fire. And so scientists will make sure, and at PNR we will make sure that the sites are safe before we give them any license. Thank you very much.
To support Dr. Arcilia's answer, even before a construction permit can be issued to a nuclear facility, a siting study, a very extensive siting study has to be conducted. Dr. Arcilia knows the details of this. That includes not just the seismic characterization, but also the geotechnical hazard, the orology of the location, and so on. and all of those are considered in designing the plant. So they have in the site study the consultants should know the maximum possible earthquakes that could happen in that location, whichever. Again, there's no perfect site for a power plant or for any nuclear facility, but there are ways to address through engineering solutions the characteristics of the site. That's why a very detailed study or analysis of the site has to be conducted first, and that siting study will also be reviewed by a regulatory body, and will also have inputs from the international community before it can even finalize. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Astronomer and Dr. Arcilia. For our next question. Oh, how can we prevent accidents? How can we prevent another Chernobyl from happening to our country? How likely can an incident like Chernobyl happen? Talagang pinag-iinitan nilang mukhang mag-Chernobyl. So I know you can the answers from our speakers.
All right, I think Albi can answer, but my take on this is that number one, Chernobyl had a bad design, and our nuclear plants, the Western plants, are not Chernobyl-like. Okay, so that answers already A and B. Okay, and the accidents can be prevented also because of there are regulators very strict. Nuclear power plants are the most regulated industries in the world. Okay. Anyway, that simplifies the answer on my part. Thank you.
Thank you very much,
Yes,
Dr. Arcilia. Dr. Astronomer, you have
just in support, yung po, talagang ibang-iba po ang design ng Chernobyl. Halos wala siyang masyadong safety system. Kung meron po mga bagong itatayong plans, siguraduhin po na ina-apply po yung safety functions at yung nabi po kanina na defense in depth. Meron pong layers ng defenses to prevent accidents. So yung sa second question po, how likely? It's very unlikely po na an incident like Chernobyl can happen in the Philippines.
right. Okay, let's go on for more questions here. Okay. How will we handle or dispose the radioactive or nuclear waste? How will nuclear or radioactive waste be disposed properly to ensure a clean and safe environment? Is there a way to lessen the waste produced? Is there a way to lower the half-life of the waste? Oh,
Okay,
Yeah.
very good. Excellent. Again, and I like these questions, First, okay, how will nuclear be disposed in a safe environment? Okay, first, I'd like to make a distinction between nuclear radioactive waste and toxic waste. The advantage of radioactive waste is that it decays. Toxic waste does not decay. For example, if you have materials that are those are those are produced yung nandun sa transformers, those don't decay, so they're very, very difficult to dispose. But the problem is that the activity of radioactive waste can be as much as 10,000 years. So the current paradigm of this is actually, it also helps that for letter C, you cannot stop nuclear reactions. So geologic isolation is the way to do that. Basically, you return the materials where they come from, and the basis for this is basically, and then like nuclear plants, you also have defense in depth and what we call engineered barriers around the waste. So the waste, for example, is taken. It is the waste, and then it's either put in glass, okay, or there's the technology called synrock, and that material is wrapped with a material called bentonite. Bentonite is a clay mineral, and what happens in the bentonite is that the crystal structure of bentonite has a negative layer in the, and then since uranium and then thorium are actually are positive, if they escape from the fuel through water, they will be trapped in that crystal layer. So it's a crystal strap and then for 10,000 years it will not be moved. Okay, so that's the way to do that. So bentonite, and then you bury it at least 600 meters below the ground. Why 600 meters? Because there is a very rich uranium mine in Canada called Cigar Lake. That uranium mine could not be seen from the surface, neither chemically. Okay, so they couldn't, as if it didn't exist. So that's the depth of burial. That's why precisely in the Philippines, if we have deep burial in the deep borehole in an island, we will exceed the requirements done by the IAEA. Is there a way to lessen the waste produced? If you go down to the to the waste product itself, there's none. By the way, you are not allowed to throw this. Dilution is not allowed. Meaning, can you throw it in the ocean? So therefore, it can be diluted. That's not allowed at all. No. There's no way to lower the half-life of the waste because that's a nuclear thing. So there is a system to do this. And then for the Philippines, I would recommend, based on my expertise, deep borehole disposal in an isolated island. That's my opinion, but I have more than 10 years worth of scientific work to back that opinion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Arcilia. Dr. Astrono, you have something to add?
I believe Dr. Arcilia answered the question excellently, but just to put again this into perspective, there's no such thing as zero waste technology. All kinds of energy sources have waste, and Dr. Arcilia in his presentation showed that in fact solar has a lot of waste per unit energy that is being produced, but the waste management process in the nuclear field is second to none. We take care of the nuclear waste.
Thank you. Okay, we proceed now to the next question. Oh, we also entertain from our friends in the media a question. What is the latest poll on the Filipinos' attitude toward nuclear power? What is the latest expert study on the viability of BNPP? Okay,
I can answer. Actually, the latest poll can be answered by DOE. They conducted an SWS survey last year, and the bottom line is 80% of the Filipinos support nuclear power, although they say, but maybe not in the backyard. Okay, but if you look at the rest, they have a positive view of nuclear power, even higher than those countries that have nuclear power themselves. And I think the reason for that is because of the high cost of power, which I explained in my presentation. The latest expert study on the viability of BNPP, 3 countries have done their studies. Korea has done it, and they even put a cost to it, about $1 billion. Russia has done it, but then they haven't put a cost to it, and I think China. So all of them say that the BNPP can be rehabilitated. Thank you.
Okay, do you have some to add, Dr. Astronomer?
Nothing more.
Okay. Now, next question. Is it safe for a community to live near a nuclear power plant? Will a working nuclear power plant have a negative effect on its surroundings? Or does nuclear energy have a negative effect on the health of the community living near the power plant? Wow, interesting question, Dr. Arcilia.
Actually, I'd like to answer this because I have been to Finland. By the way, Finland is the only country in the world which is building its waste repository. And guess where the waste repository is being built? Right in the site of the nuclear power plants, because the nuclear power plants have been there for more than a generation.
Chosen as the de facto fission fuel over thorium. But one of the most prominent was that uranium makes much better bombs.
And they have
uranium enrichment.
Because the nuclear power and then the waste will have an income for them and jobs for them. Okay, so have a negative in the surroundings? Of course not. I mean, because of the containment structure. Okay, and this is what I'm saying. If you look at the survey of nuclear plants, for example, in Switzerland, they're beside countries. In Switzerland, it's beside communities. And I have said this. I don't know how long I'll be director at PNRI. If need be, just for safety. If they reopen a nuclear plant, BNPP or otherwise, I'm willing to live in that nuclear plant for a few days. Not everything because I can't work. Kasi kung may mangyari man akong mauuna. Because I'm confident. Because this is the way to say it, you know. I know how it works. So I am willing to put my mouth into what I say. Thank you very much.
Okay. Dr. Astronomo?
So in terms of safety, Dr. Arcilia has provided a sample case scenario or study in Finland. And in terms of regulation, Dr. Arcilia also mentioned that one of the most regulated facility are nuclear power plants, and one of the requirements of regulation is to ensure that the dose rates around the nuclear power plant is very low. In fact, even lower than some natural background in some countries. But just for emergency purposes, there are certain zones that defined where a community could live. Okay, but it's safe. In terms of the dose rate, it's just for emergencies or something that we don't want to happen, but we prepare for. So in terms of safety, yes, it is safe. In terms of the effect, there's no technology that will not have an effect on its surrounding. But the nuclear power plant, just like what Dr. Arcilia said, it has a containment, it has defense in depth, and it makes sure that the safety functions are always fulfilled. And there are levels of barriers and also responses whenever a plant is not operating as it's supposed to operate. On the effect of on the community, I think I've shown the data earlier that it's more the expected life expectancy is shortened more by riding a bicycle than living in a nuclear power plant, or drinking alcohol, for example, or smoking, as compared to living near a nuclear power plant.
By the way, can I add something?
Yes, sir.
Ganito, right now, my office is less than 100 meters from a research reactor with fuel. So, I mean, I come here, and maybe for those who are not even aware, in UP, if you're not, you have a nuclear fuel here. The nuclear fuel here is 10 times richer than what you would find in a nuclear power plant. And it's been here for almost 50 years. So, anyway. That's what I mean, that if it wasn't safe, we are the people here. Dr. Astronomo actually works beside that thing, and I'm only a few meters. That doesn't really make a difference, if for safety purposes. Thank you.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Next, what are the advantages and disadvantages of nuclear power? What is more advantageous between nuclear or renewables? Is it worth having nuclear over renewable energy?
Sorry, I answered this in my talk, but I'd like to reiterate something. The discussion has always been for renewables or nuclear power. Why can't it be renewables and nuclear power? And the main arguments are anchored on two things. Number one, the renewables like wind and solar have very low capacity. The capacity means availability. If, for example, the sun doesn't shine at night, there's a typhoon, you cannot have wind. So what happens then is that once you have that, you will have to have another source of power, and that typically will be coal. Why can't that be nuclear? Because nuclear is 90% available. Okay, so we should not, because this is one of the campaigns of the anti-nuclear, or sometimes the overly only renewable energy alone cannot provide all the energy. If they say that, that's lying. That's absolutely lying. But nuclear can support nuclear energy. I mean, they're not contradictory. So it should be and. So because the premise of these two questions is saying that it's not possible to have nuclear or renewable together. And actually, interestingly, a good example here is look at Germany. Germany has decided to remove nuclear and spent a lot of money in renewables, and they are spending a huge amount of money, and the energy costs have gone up. And they they haven't been able to reduce their dependency on coal, which is still 50%. So we can use both. And I, by the way, I have a solar power in my for those who want to argue with me about climate. I have solar power in my farm. I have planted 2,000 trees. No, so before you argue with me on practical levels, let's ask. I'm going to ask you, what have you done personally? I have 2,000 trees planted in the past few months. You know, papaya trees.
Okay. Do you have something more to add, Dr. Alvi?
It's not a competition between energy sources. In fact, the more diverse our resources are, the more secure we are. Because whether we like it or not, energy demand is increasing. Perhaps even right now, you have a lot of things charging. And right now, I recall this in one of the discussions of the NEPIAP. The Philippines is a service country. We are not an industrial country. Usually tayo ang consumers, we are not the producers. But if we even want to go beyond just consuming and the service vision, if we want to be industrialized, we need more reliable energy sources. There's nothing wrong with solar, and they're very welcome. There's a lot of technology that's being developed to improve them. But again, it's not a competition. What nuclear is trying to replace or even complement are the fossil fuels, which are the base load source of our electricity. But with nuclear, it will emit way lesser carbon dioxide, and at the same time, it's reliable, and the cost of the fuel is more stable. So, yeah.
Yeah. All right. It's getting heated now. Nagiging mainit ang ating talakayan. So let's proceed to the next question. Oh, this is the question here. Do we have enough nuclear engineers in the Philippines to run a nuclear power plant? Are there any scholarship or career opportunities for those who want to go into nuclear energy? Wow.
Okay, all right. I'll answer that question. Number one, do we have available nuclear engineers? Yeah, I know two nuclear engineers who have PhDs. Okay, one of them is Dr. Chris Acosta, and who has a PhD from MIT, and then Dr. Carlito Aleta, who has a PhD from Cornell. Problem is, Chris Acosta is the president of a mining company, Filminera, and then Lito Aleta is retired. But you don't need a lot of nuclear engineers to run a nuclear plant, maybe one. What you need are the technicians and the engineers, the middle level. And the way to do this is basically nuclearize or train in nuclear the many engineers that we have. Okay. Where can we train them? We can train them, for example, if we wanted to reopen the BNPP, we can send them to Korea or Slovenia, which have an operating nuclear plant, and they're willing to do that. Now, with respect to nuclear energy courses, UP has UP actually killed its nuclear energy program, nuclear energy masters in 1980s, but they have an energy engineering program. And my colleagues at PNRI, including Dr. Astronomo, have been teaching nuclear subjects. Now, for those who want to go abroad, I've been given the go-ahead by SEI. I can recommend you to any place in the world, any place on earth, okay, for a PhD. As long as you get accepted to that university, that's the only requirement. Get accepted, and then you can come to me, and then I'll write a recommendation. The Philippines will pay for everything, okay? Because nuclear is part of the priorities. Pero kailangang matanggap kayo doon sa applyan ninyo. Yun po. Meron pala kami, we have sent some, and I wish there were more. I was given about 20 slots last year, pero wala, dalawa lang yung pumasa. So mag-apply po kayo sa mga nakikinig dito, those who are really good. I encourage you to do this. Okay?
Yeah. Okay, before we proceed to the next question, merong isang very hot question na pumasok sa atin. Okay, in your opinion, can the BNPP still be open for operation? Tapos follow-up question po. Is the technology outdated? Is it safe? Or should we consider opening new nuclear power plants or using new technologies such as SMRs?
Okay, maraming questions yun. Ano? Yung una, ano yun?
In your own opinion po, the BNPP can still be open for operation?
Okay, all right. So, underline own opinion because I don't want to preempt the EO116 and the NEPIA. So, own opinion, sa aking opinion. Sa aking opinion, pwede. Bakit? 3 reasons. Cory 2, Angra, and Crisco. These are the 3 sister plants of the BNPP that are operating now. So walang operating now for more than 30 years, 40 years, safely and profitably. Okay? So we have, they're operating now, so we can, and Korea has an offer on the table to do this. Now, can we do SMRs? Fantastic. Can we do big nuclear plants? Also, the EO116 does not delineate kung anong kailangan gawin. But the beautiful thing about SMRs is that it can serve the needs of the islands that have high energy costs not connected to the grid. Pero kung BNPP lang, okay, there's an offer on the table from the Koreans. There are 3 nuclear plants, same model operating. How do you argue against that? Thank you.
Yeah.
So, in terms of possibility, it is definitely possible. Siguro yung question na lang is feasibility, and that is something that is being studied right now.
Yeah. Okay, all right. I think nasagot naman po yung tanong na yun. So let's proceed to the next question. Oh, what can the youth do to push for nuclear power?
Yan, ganito po kasi matanda na po. Anyway, matanda na ako, so I don't have any authority to talk about this. But being a professor, what I can tell the youth is this. Number one, you can do the research if you've listened to this. I will not tell you to believe. I will ask you to study what you said and think about it yourself. Pag-isipan nyo lang. And if you think it's reasonable, for example, ganito kayo, gusto nyo ng Facebook, gusto nyo mag-TikTok, no? Na walang hinto. Magreklamo kayo, di ba? So yun na lang ang dahilan. Pwede ba? Tapos yung mga klase ninyo ay nasa kayo lahat, naka-apps. So, bakit ang mahal ng kuryente natin? Yun na lang ang dahilan ninyo. Pangalawa, kung mahal ng kuryente, murang nuclear power, meron na tayong natayo. So, help with the disinformation. Ang dami kasing fake news. Yung pinag-usapan niya, sobrang dami talaga ng fake news. Napakadaming fake news. Mas marami pa kay Trump na fake news. No? And we've addressed those. And if you don't have to believe in me, find out the source yourself, and then pag-isipan nyo para sa inyong pamilya, para sa inyong mga kapatid. Ano bang matutulong kung mas mura ang kuryente? At bakit hindi kinoconsider ang nuclear power? Kung safe naman siya. Yun lang po. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Astronomo.
Please be
tulad natin.
Ayun. So tulad nung sinabi ni Dr. Caloy, let's choose kung ano yung mga binabasa nating information kasi we can see a lot of things in social media and also in the TV. And we have to distinguish kung ano yung totoo at kung ano yung hindi. So I think by just being informed, and when you're informed, you can make your own decisions about it. And from there, perhaps once you make your own decision, then you can influence others. Pero kapag halimbawa nag-decide ka na hindi informed yung decision mo, then you're also influencing others based on wrong decision. So malaki yung nagagawa ng information. And of course yun nga, dahil PYGN yung organize nito, please join PYGN. And perhaps Una would like to add more.
Okay, hello everyone. So thank you, Dr. Astronomos. Dr. Astronomos actually a member of the PYGN as well. So just to reiterate what Dr. Astronomo and Dr. Arcidia said, please do your research. Let us help spread all the benefits and the correct news on nuclear power. And if, for example, you have friends or family that might disagree with you or using, other, like, especially if they're using, for example, TV shows to prove a point, then you can engage in some friendly dialogue as well. And let's correct these misconceptions. The youth can do so much. So you can always join PYGN. The membership form is available on the PYGN Facebook page. Thank you, guys.
All right. Thank you very much, Una. So I don't have to add more for that. So let's move on to the next question. Oh, very interesting one. How can we convince the public that nuclear energy is safe and effective? How to improve the social acceptance of nuclear, maybe in layman's terms? How can we persuade those who oppose the opening of BNPP? How can we educate the public about how nuclear waste are managed and how nuclear meltdowns are avoided?
Actually, I'll take my first shot here. Actually, very good question. I love these questions. I wish you were my students. Okay, so let's yung social acceptance of nuclear. Here we need help. Kasi the problem with many scientists is that we tend not to get involved in in controversies. So here I would say to improve the social acceptance of nuclear, we would need people who are communicators. For example, I would like to be able to recruit some famous people. For example, gusto ko sanang niligawan ko dati si isang pwede maging communicator nito. For example, sino ba yan? Si Atom, Araulio, kasi Atom ng pangalan niya, physics graduate pa. What I'm saying is that these are the people na pag sinabi nila, meron sang or si Manny Pacquiao, isang punch, parang kasi para mag-explain sana sa layman's terms, kasi kung minsan hindi kami marunong, nerd ako lang, parang nerd ang dating. Pero tama. Kumita na po kayo. Kung hindi, pagtayo kayo ng nuclear plant. Yun sa mga nag-oppose. Kasi pag vested interest, yung kasabihan sa Tagalog, kung gusto may dahilan, kung ayaw, kung gusto may paraan, kung ayaw may dahilan. And then, yung nuclear waste, yun, in-explain ko na po yun. Kung gusto niyo pang malaman, pwede ko kayong, simple lang po kasi yan talagang mamamanage ang waste and meltdowns. Sinabi na rin ni Dr. Astronomo, tingnan niyo po halos 60 years na yung nuclear, 3 accidents na nangyari na medyo malaki. Tapos napag-aralan yung 3, pwede nang ma-prevent yung 3. So may paraan kung paano siya ma-control. Yun po yung masasabi natin. Pero ito po, importante po kasi itong 3 puntong ito. In fact, these are part of the deliverables of the EO116. Itong mga 3 ito. Maraming pong salamat. Thank you very much.
Hindi ako kay Dr. Arcilia. Ayan. Napakahalaga nung topic na to, stakeholder involvement and or yung public perception. And there are some nuclear facilities that have been shut down simply because of public perception. Pero yun po, ito po yung dahilan kung bakit isa sa mga 19 na infrastructure na kailangang ma-address bago makapagpatayo ng isang nuclear power plant ay yung stakeholder involvement. At doon po sa stakeholder involvement, tinitingnan po yung iba't-ibang klase ng stakeholder at kung ano yung kailangan nila para po ma-communicate sa kanila ng maayos. And again, it's very good na yun nga po, maging kapartner po kayo na mag-share. And for sourcing, it's also important that we understand where they're coming from, and to create a healthy space where we can have that dialogue kung paano po mag-meet halfway. Although nga, minsan po meron talaga ibang interest na masasagasaan, which sometimes does not make dialogue possible. But let's try to bridge as much as we can instead of building walls. And yeah, so na-address na rin ni Dr. Arcilia yung ato.
All right, here we go to our last few questions. Oh, medyo technical. What kind of reactor will be used in the Philippines? Is it possible to use fusion reactor in the near future?
Okay. Siguro ko mas alam to ni Alvi, pero ang karamihan ng magagamit sa Philippines, ang options ngayon, number one, kung buksan si BNPP, that's a PWR. Yung mga SMRs, there are also variations of PWRs, mas safe siya. Wala pa kasi yung fusion reactors, maybe that will happen in the near future, or maybe wala pa kasing commercial, at saka hindi pa talaga siya na-proven as a stable source. Pero basically variants of PWRs will be used, SMRs, and then even the large plants. Maraming versions actually in nuclear power plants that Dr. Astronom can actually address better. Thank you.
So at this point, wala pa pong decision. It is part of the study that is being conducted. Dr. Arcilia already mentioned the different yung hot topics or hot designs na kino-consider. And I think it will be a matter of looking at lahat po pwede, pero kung ano yung pinaka-feasible or pinaka-economical na option para sa bansa natin. For fusion reactors, ayun, nabagay na rin na Dr. Arcilia, it's still in the demonstration stage. Sa ngayon, wala pang commercial na nakapag-produce, so it's mostly fission reactors pa rin po. In fact, there's a joke fusion, sa fusion field na technology is always 50 years from now. 50 years ago, they were saying na, this reactor will be ready 50 years from now. After 50 years, they're still saying it's 50 years from now. It's a good source, but right now, it's not yet technically feasible to be commercialized.
Okay, I think this will be the last question for this time. So, presuming public acceptance of nuclear energy, what specific uses do you think would be of most use in the Philippine context? This came from our friends in the media. So, Dr. Arcilia, have something to say about this?
I'm not exactly sure what you mean by specific uses. Is this nuclear energy per se? Anyway, if I may interpret this question to say what specific uses of nuclear energy, it would be practical, no? As I said, this is being studied by the committee, but this could be number one. The option is reopening the BNPP. Number two, use SMRs, okay, and then number three, have the larger nuclear power plants, no. But I think it's important to have a working nuclear power plant, because then you will see what exactly is the cost. Iba kasi pag yung hindi lang theory, we already have one, but we will need to see and to see it run and run well, no? So that's the thing I could say at the moment. Thank you.
Yeah, Dr. Astronomer.
Not also sure if I interpret the question right, but my understanding is if in terms of use, nuclear power plant, of course, the main purpose is to generate electricity, which could help increase yung supply to match the demand. But if you're talking about the applications, aside from power applications, nuclear energy has non-power applications, of which PNRI has been very active for since 1955. So there are applications in agriculture, medicine, industry, and so on. And if you'd like to learn more, visit the PNRI page and visit PNRI once we're out of COVID pandemic.
Okay, thank you very much. So our respected guest speakers, our very own Dr. Carlo Arcilia and Dr. Alvi Astronomo. So we're now proceed to our last part of our program. So I'll give you to
Thank
Christy.
you so much, everyone, for sending your questions. And thank you so much to our speakers for enlightening everyone. Just to reiterate what everyone said, it is the goal of the PYGN and the PNRI through this nuclear webinar series to engage Filipinos in the conversation, to help battle misinformation and fake news, and to educate everyone about the facts behind nuclear power and nuclear science and technology in general. It's our honor to present these certificates of appreciation to our speakers, Dr. Alvi Astronomo, for a very informative presentation about Introduction to Nuclear Power, and Dr. Carlo Arcilia for his very compelling presentation about debunking myths and misconceptions about nuclear power. Once again, we would like to thank everyone for attending the first part of Nuclear, a webinar series on nuclear power hosted by the PYGN with the DOST PNRI. Just a few announcements before we leave. To claim an e-certificate, you will need to answer the online evaluation form. To access this online evaluation form, please go to the link posted on your screens. Please give it at least 1 week for the project team to prepare and send you these e-certificates to your emails, to your email addresses. Please note that we will only keep the online evaluation form open for 2 hours. Please answer the evaluation form before 2 p.m. And I guess that concludes today's webinar. Please like the PYGN and the PNRI Facebook pages to be updated by our future events. We hope to see you soon in our next nuclear webinar series on the 20th November, 10 a.m. to 12 noon. Thank you, everyone. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good job, guys.
Thank you, sir. Thank you,
So
sir.
much.
Marami naman